She had so many loves in her life. I wondered if there was anything that she did not like. Well, she didn't like anybody criticizing her family, that was clear. She might be straightforward in straightening them up, and that was her call and role. But don't you assume that role. She was quick to rise to the defense and quick to stand forward if she felt like a member of her family was somehow not being attended to or treated properly. There's another thing that she didn't like very much, and that was death itself. You can understand how a person who's so deeply interwoven with family and friends, whose heart was able to, in a very unique way, take others in, experience their journey, feel with them even as they felt with her, that when death comes, that kind of separation from which there is no return in this life was hard. You can imagine how someone who loses their youngest son in an awful accident, so precious, so much yet to live for, how he wouldn't even want to speak about it. You can imagine how it was when her husband of 42 years, Dick, passed away in 1996. How difficult it was for her to come to terms with speaking of his death. Death, of course, is an ordinary part of life, but for most of us, for many of us, we're not comfortable with the vocabulary. We don't like to approach the reality. We prefer just to postpone always to the next day, to the next week, to the next month, to some day out there on a calendar we haven't purchased yet at the Hallmark store before we face it. But after her husband died, after Dick passed away, and she found herself then, in a way, alone, because she didn't like to be alone, she began to process grief differently. She became engaged with a grief support workshop that a dear friend in Alexandria, Connie Owens, helped facilitate. And during that season of growing in her grief, Vi herself became infinitely more comfortable with not only the prospect of death, but the dialogue of death. Being able to speak in natural terms and in a natural way about something that is, after all, very natural. She always believed that after a person was gone, that they should be remembered and talked about. But it was very difficult approaching the passing for her to even get out the dreaded D word. But in the years since her husband's passing, she moved past that. And one of the things I loved about Vi was this was a woman, at least in the years that I knew her, that always had a growing edge. She was not static. And while her values and the platform upon which she stood never wavered, her understanding of its application and impact in her life was always growing. And this was nowhere more clear than the way in which she came to terms with peace, if you will, with death. Many priceless gifts were given to Vi in her lifetime. The gift of a loving family as she was raised up. The gift of having a chance to live in different places and different times. The gift of living in the Pacific Northwest, and even this summer, she had 5 glorious days in Oregon, visiting with friends and family of days gone by, under the shadow, and as the sun set, on the snowy side of Mount Hood. She had the gift of 3 weeks at the last, where her family could gather around, and they could visit with and hear her and laugh with her. She had the gift of drawing her grandchildren close, each one of them. And in a most extraordinary way, by design and with intention, she sought to bless each of her grandchildren. And in almost a scene of biblical proportion, she brought each grandchild to her side in her hospital bed, and she spoke a word of blessing to them. With her family's permission, I want to share with you what she said. To her grandson, Nathan Richard, she pulled him close and she said, "You are my warrior." Something in Nathan's life spoke to Vi about the contest, about the fight, and the fight for the right. And she breathed into this, her second generation, this word, "You are my warrior." To Zachary Berry, she pulled him close and she said, "You are my tender heart." Something in Zachary's being spoke to her about the gentility and the tenderness of our God. And she spoke it into her grandson's life, that he might never forget it and never run away from it. You are my tender heart. To Ricky Ray, she pulled him close, and she said, you are my non-conformer. An independent spirit in a way. A young man destined to make his own path, a pathway for the right, not conformed to this world. You, Ricky Ray, my nonconformer. To Shannon Aline, my princess. You are my princess. Do not ever lose your spirit. To Samuel Lawrence, you are my debater. You are the one who will challenge and speak the man of ideas. You are my debater. Speak for the right. To Shelley Violet, you are the one who must always stay pretty and sweet. Violet, like a flower. Elegant, gorgeous, beautiful in spirit. And to Zachary's wife Jody and Nathan's fiancée Annette, these two young women who were married into her precious family, she also had a word of blessing. It was a word of thanks and gratitude. She said, thank you for finding these, my grandsons. And she trusted her grandsons into their care. Those kinds of moments, that kind of a snapshot, perhaps summarizes Vi's life. A very intentional, straightforward, direct, life-giving smile of a woman who knew how the world was and knew how it could be, who knew who she was and knew who she could be, who knew who her God was and how he called her to be.